Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a game from the 2004 Reykjavik Rapid between Gary Kasparov, who's playing the white pieces, versus Magnus Carlsen. At the time, Kasparov was rated 28-31, and Carlsen, still just a 13-year-old international master, was rated 24-84. This game lasted 32 moves, but I think it's a pretty good one to go through because it involves arguably one of the best ever chess players, Gary Kasparov, and the number one chess player, as of the July 2011 FIDE rating list, Magnus Carlsen. One other interesting thing to note is that about 1 month after this game was played, that's when Magnus Carlsen met all the requirements for that Grandmaster title. So let's have a look at this. We have Kasparov opening up with c4, Carlsen knight f6, knight c3, g6 going for the King's Indian setup, and now e4, putting a giant grip on that d5 square, so there is not going to be any d5 move. If d5 did want to get played, it's going to have to be played right now. But we don't have that. g6, e4, d6, d4. So with such a pawn center, black is certainly going to have to strike at it at some point. And since d5 is no longer on the cards, we're going to need either the c pawn or e pawn to strike at the white pawn center. So bishop g7, knight f3, castle, bishop e2, and now e5. So black is going with this pawn striking in the center. And now bishop to e3. There is no win of a pawn because even though this knight wins the pawn in this position, it's also unprotected and it fails. Well, it could just be met with just knight takes pawn, discovered attack on the knight. So instead we just have more development by white. Bishop e3, developing the bishop, watching over d4, and now black gives up the center, capturing on d4. Instead we could see knight g4, attacking the bishop, chasing it to g5, just showing a few moves deep. That's as far as I want to take this right here. f6, the bishop is hit, and it has a big decision to make. Where exactly does it want to reside? The knight, on the other hand, is either going to be kicked away to h6, or it will voluntarily go to that h6 square, where it will then pivot on f7 and be a pretty good contributor to this e5 square, which is a strong point for the black position. We don't enter that territory. Instead, again, black gives up the center. After pawn takes, how exactly to recapture? Capturing with the queen would allow knight g4, both queen and bishop being hit, something you want to avoid. Similarly, bishop takes would allow knight development with tempo. So that's why we have knight takes. And now c6, an important point, is this position right here, because it may be very, very tempting to just want to, let's say, castle. And even though this is a developing move, it could run into some trouble here, because after rook e8, how exactly to meet the pressure against that e4 pawn? Do you move that bishop again? Do you move this queen to, let's say, c2? Let's take a look at the queen c2 move. First and foremost, does this queen really want to play the role of watching over a pawn? Probably not. And that move could be met with, let's say, just knight g4, trying to chase that bishop away from the defense of the knight. White would pretty much be forced into giving up the bishop pair when there's a position here which is still open. I don't know if that could really be recommended. Also, if you do f3, well, that's now going to allow a move like d5, taking advantage of the fact that this bishop is now unprotected. And so white could capture in this direction with that pawn, but when it comes to this pawn, it's pretty much powerless. Can't capture because of rook takes bishop. So how to really maybe deal with this situation? Black makes this c6 move in order to prepare d5. And so instead of castle, in other words, in this position, we have white playing f3, taking this move into account, preparing to meet this rook to e8 move, which is played with now not castle, but bishop f2. What is this move doing? It's getting out of harm's way along this e-file, and it's allowing this pawn to have more strength. It has its strength back. And so this next move by black, d5, can now be met with e takes d, and that's exactly what we see. So e takes d, c takes d, and now c5. So a great change has just occurred with regard to the pawn structure. We have a 3-on-2 with regard to the queenside structure. And we also have an isolated pawn on d5. What that implies is that d4 is going to be an important square for white to maintain control over. And the reason for that is because if you don't have control over it, this pawn could push forward. And this is a passed pawn, and you're going to want to keep it blockaded at its very earliest point. And d4 is that point. The other thing to take note of is that since this pawn is now on the c5 square, you'll note that its support points are going to be important for black to be taking into account. So what are this pawn's support points? Its support points are both b6 and d6. b6 really isn't too much of a concern. It's not like there's going to be some knight landing on the b6 square because we have the a7 pawn watching over it. But you'll note that the other square, this d6 square, is very vulnerable to the black side right here. It's a hole in the black position, and it has that c5 pawn, which acts as a supporter for that a knight, let's say, getting to that square. So certainly a square to be cautious of is that d6 square. But before we even get there, we have more development for black. Knight c6. Only now does white castle. And now knight to h5, looking to pivot on f4, but white is able to conveniently defend that with queen to d2. And I use the word convenient because I think that queen might have wanted to go there anyway. And now she's doing a couple things, in fact. She's watching over f2. She's stopping the knight from pivoting there. And she's also vacating this d1 square for the queen rook. After bishop e5, well, what is that move looking to do? It's lending support to that f4 square, so this move is maybe available, but white just stops that with g3. And even though it weakens the h3 square, this really isn't that much that big of a problem really for the white side. The pieces for the black side, if they can't really crash through, they're just going to start to become a little bit misplaced, this guy right here in particular. One other thing to note is that at the very early stage in the game, and by very early I'm referring to move 2, when black makes this move g6, they're kind of saying that one of their minor pieces is going to hold a greater value than any other minor pieces that they have. That piece being their dark square bishop, and the reason for that is because what does g6 do exactly? Well, it prepares for that bishop to be developed to g7, but it's also weakening f6 and h6. And so if you're going to, on the black side, give up your dark square bishop in some manner, and still, if there are still, let's say, a lot of pieces remaining on the board, in particular the queens, that could certainly turn out to be a problem. And in this game, it's a big problem. So after bishop to e5, we have g3. h3 is weakened. Black tries to take advantage of that. You know, the bishop is deep in the white position, controlling squares near the white king. But you'll note that even though the rook is attacked, it's maybe just being chased away to a square it already wanted to go to. Certainly this file is going to be a good one for a white rook. So we have rook e1. After knight to e7, this is where it starts to maybe show itself a little bit that the coordination of the black pieces is just a little bit off when you have, I guess you'd say, a fianchettoed knight. Not really the ideal placement for a knight. The other pieces are maybe well placed, but this knight right here on g7, not so hot. And usually it'll just take one poorly placed piece in order for your position to maybe crumble. And the position really does crumble very, very fast, unfortunately, for black. Before we have any really strong move just yet, we do have rook on a to d1, getting the last piece involved, bolstering the center right here. These rooks, very, very well placed. Hard to suggest better placements for those rooks. The knight on c3, classically developed. It's very well on that square. The bishops, it's a really, really nice setup for white. But again, what's really glaring for the black side, unfortunately, is that knight on g7. So rook to c8, trying to get some other piece involved, but I think it's just too little too late at this point, unfortunately, because of the really simple idea of getting a knight to that d6 square, and it starts with knight on d to b5, and I don't know that there's really much that black can do in this position. What black ended up choosing to do was kick the knight to that square. And so after bishop takes knight, because we do have this fork going on, so that knight move comes with that much more of an effect. Not only is it just pivoting on a hole, but It's hitting both rooks. So bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and now d4. This right here is a pretty interesting position. It may be very tempting to just want to go ahead and grab that pawn, but white doesn't. They play knight e4, trying to just focus on f6, and that's very telling in this game. But before we get to that point, if instead we did have bishop takes pawn, there's an interesting variation that I took note of in this game, and it may have come in the following form. If knight captures bishop in this position, queen captures, knight f5 could start to maybe cause white some problems, and I think black could maybe wriggle out of this situation, even though this pawn is very deep, and looking to press forward to d7 to fork both rooks. What exactly to do in this position? If, let's say, the queen maybe retreats to d2, you'll note we could have now queen to b6, and this is an interesting variation that I ended up finding. After this check, king h1, knight to e3, this could be really problematic for white. Well, problematic to the point where white could maybe get away with a draw at this point. The rook is being hit, and if white was maybe banking on this particular move working, it actually doesn't. For example, if d7 in this position, we could have bishop g2 check, king g1, knight takes rook discover check, king takes bishop, queen f2 check, king h1, and after knight takes knight, it seems like white is still going to be quite alright, and they're going to be up a piece after the smoke has cleared. But not so fast, actually, because after pawn takes knight, we now have rook on c to d8, and after pawn takes rook, rook takes queen, and this queen's position is great. She can't be dislodged. She's keeping the king right in the corner. We have a 5-on-5 with regard to the pawns, and a situation here where this bishop is caught in a crossfire, pinned in both directions. And the queen, with its pressure on the rook, there's nothing that this bishop can do. Even though it's present on the board, it's kind of in a position where it just can't move anywhere. And so there's no progress to be made, unfortunately, in this position. And just showing, let's say, one quick draw in this position, it would come in the following form. Black could always just make a move like h5 and then move the king back and forth on, let's say, g8 and h7. And there's no progress to be made on the white side. And it would just turn out to be a draw. So I don't know that this would all be forced. I think it is maybe forced at this point right here if we did have queen to d2, but maybe there is something maybe a little bit different. But I thought that was one interesting variation which maybe white had spotted and just wanted to avoid altogether at this point right here. So instead of, in other words, capturing on d4, we had knight to e4, focusing instead on A, preserving this bishop, and by doing so, you're preventing any nonsense that might occur against your king along this diagonal, and B, keeping, again, a close eye on that f6 square. So bishop f5, unfortunately, is met with a really nice move, and that is d7, landing a fork to these two rooks, and if queen takes, this is going to be lights out very quick. So instead, bishop takes is necessary, and only now at this point do we have bishop takes on e4, because after knight takes bishop, and that is the move that gets played, but you'll note that getting that knight to that f6 square is going to be very troublesome to the black side. After knight takes bishop, queen takes knight. Once again, this knight is getting ready to pivot on f6. Again, black does not have a dark square bishop. f6, h6, if you can maybe access either of those squares, look to do that in your own games. Certainly f6 is going to be the one white is looking to get to from such a position here. There is no way out, unfortunately, for black at this point. It's just downhill. There is no way to save the game. So how this actually finishes up is knight to f5. There's nothing really else to do. This bishop is hit twice. The knight is getting ready to go to f6. After knight to f5, the queen is being attacked. White, of course, just has to be maybe a little bit careful here and not to just go forward with knight to f6 check, king h8, and this queen is being hit, and she can't move to a square where she still keeps a close eye on f6, And so if the queen now takes on d7, we would have queen takes knight, and black is getting out of any trouble. So instead we just have, of course, not just the knight going to f6, but just queen takes bishop. And this game finishes up very quickly. Queen gives check, king goes to the corner. There's just a little bit of pressure that black is able to place on white, but after white consolidates, that's going to be very telling. White is certainly up a piece at this point. Queen takes pawn. White is up material, so you offer queen exchanges. What else is there really to do after the exchange of queens? Bishop c4, knight d4, hitting on f3, but after rook to e3 to defend that pawn, since white has now consolidated and there's no more pressure that black can place on white, black ends up resigning at this point. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.